Dawn spilled over Coldwater Divide like pale gold across stone. Silas' heart stood at the edge of the timberline, breath turning to mist, eyes fixed on the basin far below. The mountain didn't ask him to be happy, it only asked him to be ready. For years he'd answered with routine, cut straight trees, split clean shingles, haul the best beams down to Aspen Fork, say as little as possible, then climb back up to his lodge where the wind kept him company and no one expected warmth. But this spring, the loneliness had changed shape. It wasn't loud. It was the kind that showed up in small places, an extra plate he never set, a quiet that didn't feel peaceful anymore. And when Reverend Lyle climbed the ridge with a Bible under one arm and concern on his face, Silas knew the visit wasn't about Sunday. The Reverend spoke carefully, as if words might bruise. A woman in Juniper Bend needed a new start. Clara Hensley, a seamstress with steady hands and a recent grief she didn't advertise. The church wasn't arranging romance, it was arranging survival with dignity. Two people who could share a roof, share work, and stop pretending they didn't need anyone. Silas didn't pretend it sounded noble. He only asked one question. Will she regret it once she sees the climb? She asked for the truth, the Reverend said, and she still said yes. Silas agreed the way he agreed to winter wood, not with excitement, with responsibility. He'd offer safety, food, a place that didn't lie. He told himself that was enough. He tightened the roof straps. He patched the window frame where the glass rattled in storms. He built a second bed, simple and solid, and set it in the small room that had been nothing but storage. When he hung a fresh curtain, his hands paused, caught between embarrassment and something that felt dangerously like hope. Clara arrived at the mining stop below on the noon train, stepping down into dust and sun with a carpetbag and a wooden box tied with twine. No fluster, no wide-eyed fear. She looked up at the ridge as if she'd already measured it in her mind. Silas met her at the old sawmill tearing, where the stage road turned into a narrow trail. "You're Silas Hart," Clara said. Her voice was calm, but not flat, the calm of someone who has learned to keep moving. He nodded, then realized nods don't build a life. "The climb's steep," he managed. "I brought good shoes," she said, and there was the faintest curve at the corner of her mouth, not flirtation, a quiet readiness. On the way up, Clara didn't fill the air with questions. She watched, she counted steps without making it obvious. She noted where snow still hid in shadow and where the creek cut a clean line through the grass. When the pack mule balked at a slick rock, she soothed it with a soft hum that made Silas glance over, because it sounded like confidence, not performance. At the lodge, she didn't gasp at the plainness. She set her box on the table and opened it with care. Inside, needles, thread, folded cloth, and a little book of pressed plants. She wasn't arriving empty, she was arriving equipped. That first evening, the stove ticked as it warmed, and the room held the scent of pine pitch and soap. Clara found a loose latch on the pantry and fixed it without comment. Later, she placed 2 cups on the shelf instead of 1, not as a grand statement, just as a fact. Silas watched these small choices like they were unfamiliar weather. Could a person make a place feel different without trying to change it? Night came clear and cold. Wind brushed the eaves. Somewhere in the dark, an owl called once, then went quiet. Silas lay awake, listening to the new sound in his house, another life breathing, steady and real. And just before sleep took him, Clara spoke from the next room, so softly it felt like she was talking to the mountain itself. "Did you ever plan to stay alone forever, Silas?" He didn't answer, not because he was cruel, because he wasn't sure which answer would be the braver one. The next weeks taught them each other in ordinary ways. Silas learned that Clara rose early without being asked, not to prove anything, but because mornings made her feel capable.
Clara learned that Silas kept his tools lined up with quiet care, as if order could keep the world from surprising him. Then one afternoon the wind came down the ridge, smelling faintly of smoke. Clara saw the thin gray thread first. Silas didn't like what he felt in his chest. Not panic, worse, concern, the kind that reached beyond his own roof. Down in Aspen Fork, the wooden flume that carried meltwater from Upper Creek was already strained from a dry season. If fire ran through the trees near that line, the basin wouldn't just lose shade, it would lose water. Silas tried to keep his voice neutral. "They'll handle it." Clara didn't argue. She simply unpacked her wooden box and pulled out a roll of clean cloth, a tin of salve, and bandages cut with neat edges. She set them by the door as if preparing for a visitor. "What are you doing?" Silas asked. "Getting ready," she said, and looked at him. "For whatever happens, don't you?" That night, the stray pup they'd taken in, Cedar, whimpered under the bench. Clara calmed him with one steady hand, and Silas felt the strange pull of being part of it. The next morning, they rode down. Aspen Fork wasn't a dramatic town, it was a practical one. Men checked the flume supports, women filled barrels, children carried buckets as if they were playing at heroism, unaware they were practicing it. Silas arrived and was handed a measuring stick before anyone even said hello. He could have refused. He could have turned his mule and ridden back up, where problems belonged to other people. But Clara was already off her saddle, tying her skirt up for work. She wasn't here to watch, she was here to join. Silas inspected the flume line. The boards were warped, the braces were tired. The simplest fix would fail the first time the creek surged. He didn't make a speech, he pointed, he assigned. His words came out short and clear, and people listened because he sounded like someone who had saved a roof in the rain before. By midday, the heat pressed down. The smoke thickened, then drifted away. No one knew where the fire would go, and every hammer strike sounded louder. A brace split with a crack. The flume sagged. Water spilled into the dirt. A hush spread. Not fear, exhaustion, the kind that makes folks give up quietly. Clara stepped into the gap and pressed her palm to a trembling post. "Hold," she called, not shouting, just firm. Then she looked at Silas. "What do you need?" Silas stared at the sagging frame and realized the truth. He'd kept his best seasoned beams stacked at his lodge for years, saving them for himself, for some future repair that always felt more important than other people. If he went back for them, they might lose hours. If he kept them, the town might lose water. Here was the real test, not of strength, but of belonging. Silas turned his mule toward the ridge without a word. When he returned with the beams strapped tight, Clara's eyes softened in a way that felt like a hand on his shoulder. They lifted together, the new braces seated clean, the flume steadied, and when the creek was guided back into its channel, the water didn't roar like victory, it simply ran, faithful and clear. That evening, the schoolhouse doors stayed open, stew simmered, bread was passed. Someone played a slow tune on a harmonica near the window, and the sound mixed with soft laughter and the scrape of boots on wood. Silas sat beside Clara, Cedar asleep at their feet. For once, he didn't stand near the exit. Clara didn't make a grand declaration. She only slid her fingers into his, as if to say, "This is how warmth is built, one steady choice after another." Later, riding back under a sky stitched with stars, Silas looked at the ridge and felt it shift in his mind. Not a fortress, not a hiding place, a home that could hold two people, and maybe, in time, a whole community's worth of light.